The night my father bet me in a poker game, the room went so quiet I could hear the cards whisper across the felt. I was still wearing the gray t-shirt I had trained in, my hair twisted into a loose knot that was already falling apart, when the service elevator opened beneath Palazzo Nero and delivered me into a room full of men too rich to shout and too dangerous to need to. The air smelled like money, whiskey, and the kind of fear that never made a sound. Green lamps glowed over a single private table. Crystal glasses caught the light. 2 armed men stood at the back wall like sculptures someone had taught to breathe. At the head of the table sat Sergio Lombardi. You couldn't live in Las Vegas and not know his name. Sergio owned casinos, hotels, unions, freight lines, nightclubs, and enough city councilmen to turn a bad law into a favor before breakfast. People said he controlled half the city. The other half just paid rent to survive beside him. He was younger than the legends made him sound, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair brushed back, a black suit cut clean across his shoulders, and a stillness that made every other man in the room seem loud, even when they weren't speaking. His face gave nothing away. Only his eyes moved, cool and watchful, taking in everything. Across from him sat my father, Raymond Reyes, sweating through a white dress shirt he could never afford, and had probably stolen off a poker room coat rack 2 weeks earlier. His hands were shaking. That alone told me how bad it was. My father had the kind of charm that looked like warmth until you grew up inside it. Then you learned it was only hunger with better timing. He had spent most of my childhood teaching me card values before he ever taught me how to cross a street. By 12, I could spot a false shuffle faster than most dealers, and by 14 I could read the difference between a bluff and a man trying not to cry. By 16, I knew addiction had a smell: sour, metallic, mean. By 26, I had stopped answering most of his calls, but 40 minutes earlier, an old pit boss from downtown had called me anyway. "Come get your father now," he'd said. "If you don't, he won't leave alive." So I drove from the boxing gym to Palazzo Nero, with my knuckles still taped under cheap wraps, parked in a fire lane, and took a service elevator I wasn't supposed to know existed. I had expected to find my father drunk, begging, maybe bleeding. I had not expected to hear him say, in a voice hoarse with whiskey and desperation, "I still have something left." The dealer looked at him and didn't move. My father dragged a hand down his face, then pointed straight at me. "My daughter." The word hit me harder than a punch. Every eye in the room turned. I stopped 3 steps inside the door and felt something inside me go cold and hard. My father looked at Sergio again, not at me. That was the worst part. He didn't even have the decency to be ashamed enough to meet my eyes. "Maya," he said. "She works surveillance. Smart as hell. Grew up around the game. You win, she's yours until the debt is done." I had spent years learning how to stay calm when men lied with straight faces. But for 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. Then I laughed. It came out sharp, ugly, unbelieving. "You drunk, stupid bastard," I said, stepping toward the table. "I'm not a car. I'm not a watch. I'm not anything you put in a pot." My father flinched, but only because I'd raised my voice. Shame wasn't what moved him. Fear was. Fear had always been the only thing addiction still respected. Sergio Lombardi leaned back in his chair. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at my father for a beat too long, then shifted his gaze to me. It felt like standing in front of a locked door and realizing the person on the other side had already heard your whole life through the wood. "Human beings don't belong in a pot," he said at last. His voice was low, almost quiet. The room still tightened around it. My father swallowed. "Then call the debt what you want," he muttered. "The deed to her mother's house is still in my name. The line of credit, too. The marker I signed in hers. Everything tied to her goes on the table." My heart stopped. I looked at him so hard my vision tunneled. "What marker?" He looked away. That told me everything. I turned to Sergio. "He forged something." "I know," Sergio said. That was worse. My skin went cold all over. He knew. Of course he knew. A man like him never sat down blind. Sergio lifted 2 fingers. One of his men stepped forward and placed a thin leather folder beside him. Sergio opened it without hurry, glanced once at the top page, and closed it again. "Your father used your name on a private medical line 18 months ago, he said, looking at me, not him. Then he put a second note against the house in North Las Vegas that belonged to your mother before she died. Both were sold twice. Tonight the paper sits at this table." I stared at my father. 18 months ago, I'd spent 3 weeks paying off a hospital bill that wasn't mine because I thought some billing clerk had made a mistake. I had eaten instant noodles for 2 months to catch back up. I had sold my mother's old bracelet to keep the lights on. He had signed my name. Something in me cracked, clean and bright. My father licked his lips and tried for a smile that had worked on women, bookies, bartenders, and too many versions of me when I was younger. "Mija, listen." "No." The word came out flat. Then I looked at Sergio again. "If you already know all that, why are we still talking?" His gaze held mine. "Because your father made a public offer," he said. And because 3 men in this room would buy those notes by sunrise if I don't. That made me look around. I recognized one face at the far end of the table then, Enzo Carbone, who ran gaming finance for 3 of Lombardi's casinos. I had seen him once in surveillance footage downtown, walking through a restricted cage area with a smile that never reached his eyes. He was handsome in the polished, rotten way some men were. Gold watch. Perfect suit, fingers resting too softly on his chips. He was watching me with interest that made my skin crawl, that told me Sergio wasn't lying. Sergio tapped the folder once. Your father cannot wager you, but he can lose every fraudulent claim he has over your life. If I call and I win, I take the deed, the forged debt, the marker in your name, and the right to decide where you walk out tonight. He never comes near you again without my permission. My father sat up fast. And if I win, I erase what you owe me. The room sharpened. Even my father looked surprised. Sergio's face didn't change. I don't repeat myself, Raymond. My father looked at the chips in front of him, then at me, then at Sergio. Greed won. It always did. Deal. I should have screamed. I should have overturned the table. Instead, I stood there rooted to the floor, hearing the blood pound in my ears, because I had learned a long time ago that some moments were too ugly for tears and too dangerous for panic. The dealer began the hand. I moved closer without meaning to, not because I cared whether my father won. He had already lost me years ago, but because the game felt wrong. It took me 3 seconds to see it. The dealer's right thumb dragged half a beat too long over the deck. The cut sat deeper than it should have, and on the turn, Enzo Carbone touched his ring finger to the table once. A signal. My spine went rigid. The deck was cold. Someone had arranged this night. Sergio put in his chips with the calm of a man setting down a glass of water. My father matched with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The river came. My father's face changed first. Relief. Hunger. The kind that makes men stupid. He turned over his hand like it had saved his soul. 2 pair. Sergio looked at the cards for maybe half a second before setting down his own. A flush. No one breathed. My father made a sound I had never heard from a human throat before. It was too raw for language. He shoved back from the table so hard his chair tipped. No, he hissed. No, that's wrong. It is, I said before I could stop myself. The room turned to me. I stepped forward and pointed at the deck. The deal was dirty. Enzo Carbone smiled very slowly. Sergio's eyes moved to me again, sharper now. My father looked at me like I had betrayed him. Imagine that. A man trying to sell his daughter, offended to discover she had limits. The house doesn't argue with the river, one of the older players muttered. I ignored him. The dealer dragged on the cut, and the burn on the turn sat high. Somebody set that deck. Enzo spread one hand. You accusing the room, sweetheart? I looked straight at him. I'm accusing the one man smiling. That made 2 bodyguards move. Sergio only lifted 1 finger, and they stopped instantly. He turned toward the dealer. Check the deck. The dealer went pale. That was answer enough. A second man stepped in, broke the cards apart, and found the notches within seconds. Tiny slivers at the corners, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The room changed, not louder, worse. Stillness from men deciding who was going to die first. My father was too drunk and desperate to see what he had nearly walked into, but I did. That hand had never been about him winning. It had been about Sergio sitting at a rigged table in front of witnesses, and I had just announced it out loud. Enzo Carbone's smile disappeared. Sergio rose. I had seen powerful men in Vegas all my life. Casino owners, politicians, athletes, men who believed money could make gravity move differently around them. None of them moved like Sergio Lombardi. He stood, buttoned his jacket once, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He looked at the notched deck, then at Enzo, then at my father. Finally, he turned to me. You saw it from the door. It wasn't a question. Yes. Good. That was all he said. Then he looked at 2 men near the wall. Take Raymond's papers. Take his watch, his keys, and whatever dignity he thought he brought in with him. He leaves here breathing because she's watching. My father lunged then, toward me, toward Sergio, toward whatever version of his life addiction still told him he deserved. He didn't get far. One of Sergio's men folded him to the floor, in a movement so clean, it barely looked violent. I stepped back on instinct. My father coughed on the carpet, rage and whiskey pouring off him like gasoline. Maya, he shouted. You don't walk out with him. I looked down at him. For one terrible second, I remembered being 8 years old and waiting on the apartment stoop with a plastic trophy from a spelling bee because he had promised to come see me and never did. Then being 11 and watching him sell my bike for card money. Then being 17 and realizing my mother had died with less morphine than she should have had because he'd taken part of the emergency cash before we got to the hospital. I had buried him in pieces for years. Tonight was only the first time his body noticed. I don't walk out with you, I said. Sergio's gaze stayed on me for another second, unreadable. Then he nodded once toward the door behind him. You come with me now. I didn't move. Why? Because the deck was rigged, your father was bait, and the men who marked those cards are not done with you. At the back of the room, Enzo Carbone had disappeared. That answered the question I hadn't asked. I bent, picked something off the carpet beside a fallen chip tray, and slipped it into my pocket. 1 ace, corner nicked, proof. Then I straightened and looked at the most dangerous man in the city. Separate room, I said. Separate lock. No one touches me without asking. I see every paper tied to my name tonight, and if you lie to me once, I walk. The faintest flicker crossed Sergio's face. Not amusement, recognition, done. I followed him out of the room with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. The private office above the poker floor was bigger than my entire house, and colder than the room below. Glass walls looked over the strip like Las Vegas had been built as a toy city, and left switched on for men like Sergio Lombardi to admire when they couldn't sleep. Veronica Hale, his attorney, was already waiting with 3 folders and a tablet. She was in her 40s, elegant, severe, and looked like the kind of woman who could end a mayor with 1 phone call and still make it to dinner on time. She slid the papers across the table. I sat, I read. By the 3rd page, I wanted to throw up. My father had used my name on a private medical note, then again on a property-backed line tied to the little stucco house my mother had left to me. Both were legal enough to be enforceable, dirty enough to ruin me, and layered through shell lenders designed to keep me in court for years if I fought them through normal channels. I closed the folder slowly. When were you going to tell me? I asked nobody and everybody. No later than tomorrow morning, Veronica said. I laughed once without humor. How considerate. Sergio stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking down at the city like it had done something annoying and expensive. Your father didn't end up at my table by accident, he said. I looked at him. He turned. Someone needed a public game. Someone needed witnesses, and someone expected me to lose my temper when a drunk fool put his daughter in the middle of it. Enzo, I don't like making accusations before I can bury them in evidence. The answer told me enough. I pulled the ace out of my pocket and set it on the table. Veronica leaned in first. Where did you get this? Floor by the chip tray after the hand. Sergio came to the desk, picked up the card, and turned it under the light. There it was. A tiny nick near the corner, barely visible. His eyes lifted to mine. You think faster than the room. Comes from growing up around cheats. Veronica collected the card in an evidence sleeve. Sergio studied me for a moment too long, then said, Here are your options. 1. You walk out now, and by morning, Carbone's people file against the house, freeze your bank accounts, and make a very persuasive argument to several crooked men that you stole marked evidence from a private room. 2. You stay under my protection for 30 days, help me identify the people inside my operation who set this up, and when we're done, every debt tied to your name disappears. I folded my arms. Protection, I repeated. That the same thing people in your world call captivity when they're being polite? No, the answer came so fast it landed clean. I held his gaze. He held mine right back. Then define it. You get a room no one enters without permission. You get a phone. You get a salary since you'll be working. You get eyes on the papers that concern you. You get security because tonight 6 men saw your father try to wager you and saw you catch a rigged deck. That makes you useful to my enemies and inconvenient to my friends. The honesty shocked me more than a lie would have. I looked at Veronica. And if I say yes, I want copies of everything, digital and paper. Done, she said. I looked back at Sergio. And if I say no, he didn't blink. Then I still won't let Carbone take you tonight. But tomorrow gets uglier. There it was. Not a threat. A fact. I hated how much I trusted facts. I leaned back, exhausted all at once. 30 days, I said. Not 31. 30. I pick what I work on. You'll work what matters. That wasn't what I said. The corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. You'll have input. Separate room. You already said that. I'm saying it again, so you know I mean it. I knew the first time. Something about the way he said it made my pulse trip once. I ignored it. Fine, I said. 30 days. Then I'm gone with my house, my name, and my life. Sergio nodded. Valentina will show you upstairs. The woman who stepped through the door a moment later was tall, scarred, and had the kind of calm that only came from surviving bad men and worse orders. Valentina Russo looked me over once, noticed the tape under my sleeves, the way my weight sat on the balls of my feet, and gave the smallest nod. Not friendliness, assessment. I respected that more than false warmth. As she led me toward the elevator, I stopped and looked back at Sergio. One more thing. He waited. If I hear anyone in this building say you won me tonight, I'm breaking their nose. For the first time, something close to real amusement touched his face. If you hear it, get in line. My room was on the top residential floor of Palazzo Nero, a suite larger than the house I had grown up in, and quieter than any place in Vegas had a right to be. Someone had already stocked the bathroom with unscented toiletries, the closet with clothes in my size, and the dresser with a knife tucked exactly where a woman who didn't sleep easy would look first. That last part caught me off guard, Valentina noticed. He told them not to insult you with pink pajamas, and not to insult me by expecting me to take your blade, she said. I looked at her. He says thoughtful things for a man people whisper about like he's a storm. Valentina shrugged. Storms still have patterns. Then she left. I showered until the water ran cold and stood under it long after the sweat, smoke, and poker room stink had gone down the drain. I wrapped myself in a hotel robe I could never afford and sat on the edge of the bed with my mother's silver ring pressed into my palm until the ache in my chest settled into something I could carry. I didn't cry. I was too angry for tears and too tired for panic. Around 3 a.m, I walked barefoot into the living room and stood at the window. The strip blazed below me, neon and money and lies, beautiful enough from a distance to make tourists think this city was built on luck. It wasn't. Vegas was built on hunger. And men came here convinced they could outrun the truth and left with smaller wallets, bigger secrets, and wedding rings in their pockets that belonged to somebody else. I knew because my father had taught me from childhood what desperation sounded like when dressed as confidence. A soft knock came at the suite door. My hand went to the knife automatically. "It's me," Valentina called. "And before you stab me, Her expression didn't change. "You already were." She walked away before I could answer. I slept maybe 2 hours. By 8 the next morning, I was in Palazzo Nero's surveillance center, black coffee in hand, staring at a wall of screens the size of a small apartment. If churches had saints, this city had cameras. Casino entrances, cage stations, elevators, garages, private corridors, loading docks. In Vegas, everybody lied in public and got caught in fluorescent high definition. The room itself was cool and quiet, designed for people who liked control more than sunlight. Rows of analysts worked under low lights, headsets on, eyes tracking patterns ordinary people never saw. I belonged there immediately. Maybe that was the ugliest thing about me. No matter how hard I had fought to build a life outside cards and cheats and backroom games, the language of hidden hands still lived in my bones. Valentina stood beside me while I reviewed the footage from the night before. She let me work in silence for almost 20 minutes before saying, "You've done this professionally. Monarch Queen on Fremont," I said. "Knights, not the fancy side. Mostly drunk tourists, counterfeit chips, and men who think card counting is a personality." Her brows lifted slightly. "Why not tell him that?" "You didn't ask." She nodded once, as if that answered something bigger. We ran the private room footage in slow motion. The dealer's thumb lagged. The cut drifted. Enzo's ring tapped once. My father's eyes flashed to the right instead of the board half a beat before the river came, which meant someone had promised him something. I rewound it 6 times. "Your father knew?" Valentina asked. "He knew enough to think he had help. Would he sell you to save himself?" The question should have hurt. It didn't. He already did. That shut down any pity before it could rise, which was exactly how I liked things. By noon, I had 3 things pinned on the digital board. The cold deck was prepared in-house, Enzo Carbone signaled during the hand, and the switch required access to the private room chain of custody. Only 6 people in Palazzo Nero had that level of access. Enzo was one of them. The other 5 either answered to Sergio, slept with his numbers, or had worked for his father before him. Complicated. At 1 p.m, Sergio walked into surveillance. Nobody straightened in a theatrical way. That wasn't his style, but the room changed all the same. Men looked sharper. Keyboards stopped making lazy noises. One analyst actually sat up enough to remember he had a spine. Sergio went straight to me. No entourage, no wasted motion. "What do you have?" Not "how are you?" Not "did you sleep?" Oddly enough, I respected that more. "Your game was rigged from inside," I said. "The deck was prepared before it hit the private room," Enzo signaled. My father knew the hand was supposed to save him. Sergio glanced at the board. "Supposed to? Whoever arranged it needed a spectacle. Best guess? Either they wanted you to lose publicly or to kill my father publicly. Maybe both." He read the frame breakdowns in silence. Then, "And why use Raymond? Because he's desperate, known, and stupid. Men like him are easy to steer. They think a miracle is the same thing as a chance." Sergio's gaze shifted to me at that. "What? You say things like you've buried people." I held his stare. "I buried my mother. Does that count?" Something moved in his eyes and was gone before I could name it. "Continue." So I did. We worked the rest of the afternoon. I built a pattern map of chip movements, late-night marker transfers, and cage adjustments across Sergio's properties. Ghost losses kept appearing in different accounts. Always small enough not to start a war, always large enough to matter. Somebody wasn't just rigging private games. Somebody was using games to hide larger theft. By the time the skyline turned orange over the strip, I had linked the false losses to 2 loading docks and a private club off Sahara called Velvet Room. Sergio stood behind me reading over my shoulder. He smelled faintly like clean linen, leather, and expensive smoke that didn't cling because he wasn't the one doing the smoking. "You found that in 1 day," he said. You hired the right daughter of the wrong man. He was quiet for a beat. Then, eat something. I almost told him to go to hell on principle. Instead, I realized I hadn't eaten since before the boxing gym, and my stomach was trying to fold in on itself. Valentina handed me a takeout container from nowhere. I looked from her to him. This place is creepy. Valentina actually smirked. You'll fit in. 3 nights later, I saved Sergio Lombardi's life before I had decided whether I liked him. The velvet room looked harmless from the outside, a soft gold sign. Dark windows, music leaking into the alley like perfume. Inside, it was all velvet booths, low chandeliers, polished lies. The kind of club where senators met dancers, dealers met judges, and nobody asked why the back office had 2 locks and no windows. I had traced one of the ghost marker transfers there through a chip runner named Cal D'Amico, and who had a habit of taking cash through the bar. I wore black slacks, a fitted jacket, and the same steel in my spine I always carried when I had to stand near bad men and pretend I wasn't measuring distances to the exits. Cal showed 15 minutes late. I saw him first in the mirrored wall behind the main bar. That's him, I murmured. Sergio didn't turn his head. Left or right pocket. Inner jacket. He's carrying tension on the left shoulder too. Armed. Sergio moved like nothing had happened, drifting toward the back corridor as if he had simply decided to inspect his own club. I followed. Valentina peeled right. Rafe stayed where he was. Cal saw us when he hit the kitchen door. He panicked. Bad men think panic looks like speed. It actually looks like math failing in public. He reached for his jacket. I didn't see the gun first. I saw the reflection. A man on the mezzanine above the dance floor. Silver railing. Dark sleeve. Long barrel angled down. Down! I shouted. I hit Sergio hard in the ribs and drove him sideways just as the shot cracked through the club. Glass burst behind us. Music cut. People screamed. A second shot ripped into the column where Sergio's head had been an instant earlier. Rafe moved like a tank, pulling civilians toward cover while Valentina fired once from the hallway and sent the mezzanine shooter ducking back. Cal ran. Sergio started after him. Rafe's hit, I snapped. Rafe had gone to one knee near the bar, blood spreading through his jacket. Training beat fear. I was moving before the thought finished. I slid across broken glass, ripped a napkin roll off the service station, then cursed and yanked off my own belt instead. The wound was high in the thigh, bad enough to kill, not bad enough to take him if I moved fast. Look at me, I told Rafe. He grimaced. Not usually my type. Shut up, that means you're conscious. I cinched the belt hard above the wound. He swore with feeling. Good. Angry men stayed alive longer. Sergio crouched beside us for half a second. Can you move him? Yes, I said. Get the bastard with the gun. Our eyes locked for one electric beat. Then he was gone. Valentina appeared at my shoulder, weapon in hand. Ambulance is dirty in this neighborhood. House doctor's 4 minutes out. Then give me towels and a bottle. She barked orders and the room obeyed. I had blood up to my wrists by the time the doctor arrived. Rafe stayed conscious. Barely. When it was over, when the shooter on the mezzanine was dead, when Cal D'Amico had disappeared out the kitchen into night traffic, when the club had been locked down, and the civilians quietly bought off or frightened into silence, I stood in the back hallway, washing blood from my hands in a stainless steel sink that smelled like bleach and mint. The faucet ran red, then pink, then clear. I stared at it until the shaking started, not because of the blood, because I had put both hands on Sergio Lombardi and moved him without thinking. Because for one blind second, seeing that rifle angle down toward him had felt personal, because I hated what that meant. The door opened behind me. I didn't turn. You pushed me before the shot, Sergio said. The water kept running. Yes. Why? I braced both hands on the sink and laughed once under my breath. You're really choosing this moment to ask? This is the only moment people answer honestly. I shut off the faucet and turned. He had taken off his jacket. His white shirt was open at the throat, a smear of somebody else's blood marking one cuff. Up close, he looked less untouchable than he had in the poker room. Harder, somehow. More human in all the ways dangerous men hated being seen. You want the honest answer? I said. Because if you died tonight, half the city would go feral by morning, your enemies would carve up everything you own, and I'd still be stuck in the middle of your mess. He watched me for a beat. That's not the whole answer. No, what's the rest? I should have lied. Instead, I said, I know what it looks like when a bullet is about to take the only person in a room everyone else is pretending doesn't matter. His expression changed. Barely. Enough. My father used to drag me into games when I was 13, I said quietly. Not to play, to watch, to tell him who was bluffing, who was cheating, who had cash left in the second pocket. Men ignored me because I was a skinny kid with braid marks and thrift store shoes. Then one night, a man across the table pulled a gun when he lost. Not at my father. At the guy running the room. Everybody froze. Everybody waited to see what power looked like when it was bleeding. I learned something that night. People only call men untouchable until somebody touches them. The silence between us shifted. He stepped closer, not crowding, just enough to make the air feel different. And yet, you moved anyway. Don't make me regret it. A line appeared at the edge of his mouth, not a smile. Something more private than that. Too late, he said. Then he reached past me, took a clean towel from the rack, and held it out. I stared at it. He stared back. It took me a second to realize he meant for my hands, because there was still blood on my wrists. I took the towel. Our fingers brushed once. My pulse misfired so hard it almost made me angry. A week passed before either of us mentioned the kiss that hadn't happened. By then, I knew more about Sergio Lombardi's empire than I ever wanted to. I knew he slept 4 hours on a good night. I knew he never raised his voice in meetings because men did stupid things trying to fill the silence for him. I knew his staff feared disappointing him more than they feared his temper, which told me a lot about what kind of violence he preferred. Precision. Consequences. Never spectacle unless spectacle served a purpose. I also knew he had rules. Women in his clubs weren't touched by staff. Dealers who skimmed from tourists lost jobs, not fingers, unless the theft was paired with force. Men who hit women in his casinos got carried out through service doors and found themselves banned from properties they didn't realize he owned until security at the next one recognized their faces. Girls too drunk to stand got driven home, no questions asked, no hotel keys copied. That didn't make him a good man. It made him a dangerous one with boundaries. In Vegas, that counted for more than it should have. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Ghost markers, rigged side games, missing cash adjustments, unsanctioned transfers through loading docks disguised as liquor invoices. Enzo Carbone sat in the middle of it all like a spider wearing cufflinks. Every path led toward him, but never far enough to stick a blade in publicly. Then I found the pattern break. It was nearly midnight in surveillance. Most of the analysts had gone home. The room hummed with electronics and stale coffee. Sergio was across from me reading a report while I reran a freeze frame from the opening game for the 20th time. I zoomed in on my father's hand, not the cards, the hand. He had a tell when he lied sober, thumb rubbing his jaw. Drunk, it changed. He pressed his ring finger against the edge of the table. Once, my eyes flicked across the frame. Enzo's hand, ring finger tap. Once, I sat up straighter. What? I pointed at the screen. Signal language. Sergio came around the desk. My father didn't know the deck was marked because somebody whispered in his ear. He knew because they coached him. Ring finger once meant stay in. Twice would have meant fold. They fed him hope hand by hand. Sergio leaned over me, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him. And Enzo used the same tell. I pulled another clip from 2 days before at a baccarat table in another property. A dealer shifted. Enzo passed behind. Ring finger tap. Player stayed in against impossible odds and somehow hit a winning run. Another clip. Another tap. Another. Sergio watched in silence. Then he said, "He's been talking to players through signals on my floor. Not just players. Your dealers, too." I sat back, suddenly seeing the whole ugly shape of it. This isn't about skim only. He's building leverage, winning debts, buying people who think they got lucky. And you saw it because your father taught you the language. I hated how true that was. Yes. He looked at me for a long moment. "Useful man, your father," he said finally. The words were cool, neutral. I turned in the chair so fast the wheels squealed. Careful. His face changed immediately, not to apology, to attention. He knew he had hit bone. My father is a coward with a good smile and a gambling problem. He loved more than my mother, more than food, more than oxygen. The only useful thing he ever did was teach me exactly what a liar looks like before he opens his mouth. The room went silent. Sergio straightened. "You're right," he said. That surprised me. He could have argued. Men like him usually did when challenged in front of subordinates. He didn't. That somehow made it worse. I stood up, suddenly too hot for the room. I need air. No one stopped me. I took the private stairs to the rooftop terrace above surveillance and walked into desert night. Dry wind, and a view of Vegas that made the city look like an expensive fever dream. Below me, the strip throbbed with light. The Bellagio fountains moved like choreography designed to distract people from debt. Helicopters cut lazy paths over the skyline. Somewhere far enough off, beyond the neon and concrete, the desert waited in complete indifference. I gripped the stone railing and tried to unclench my jaw. A minute later, the door opened again. Of course it did. Sergio stepped onto the terrace and closed it behind him. He kept several feet between us. That mattered. "I don't apologize often," he said. I looked out over the city. That sounds like a warning, not an apology. A beat, then. I spoke badly. It was so blunt I almost laughed. Instead I said, "You think because he taught me useful things, I owe him some softer memory. No. His answer came low and steady. I think pain and usefulness sometimes occupy the same room. It doesn't make them the same thing. That shut me up. Because it was true. Because I hated that it was true. The wind lifted loose strands of my hair. I tucked them behind my ear and said, my mother used to work double shifts cleaning suites at an old property off Flamingo. She'd come home smelling like bleach and hotel soap, and still make me eggs at midnight if I was awake. When she got sick, she hid it for months because we didn't have enough money. When it got bad, there was cash in the apartment. Emergency cash. She thought there was. He took some, just enough to lose it and lie about it. She died 6 months later. Different reasons. Real reasons. But I still remember counting what should have been in the envelope and what wasn't. I had never told that story to anyone in full. Not the boxing coach who knew I hit harder when I was angry. Not the women at work who thought I just hated gamblers on principle. Definitely not the man who controlled half the city and had won legal control of my life in a single hand. Sergio listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, my mother dealt blackjack on graveyard shift before I was old enough to understand why men got mean when luck left the room. My father drank half her paycheck, gambled the rest, and once sold her wedding ring to cover a marker he said he could win back in one hand. I turned to look at him. His face was unreadable, but his voice wasn't. There was iron in it, old iron, the kind forged hot and left under the skin for years. When I heard your father say your name at that table, he said, I nearly put him through the cards. Something in my chest tightened. Why didn't you? Because killing him there would have helped the man who arranged it. That answer made brutal sense. He looked out over the city again. I took the hand instead, he said, and I made sure the room saw me take the papers, not you. I frowned slightly. Why? That time he did look at me. Because the city might think what it likes about a woman who walked out beside me, he said. But men with resale plans don't reach for what they think is already under my protection. The words should have made me furious. Instead, they made something more dangerous happen. I believed him. I believed he had used his reputation like a weapon to keep worse men from closing their hands around me. The silence lengthened. I was suddenly aware of everything. The wind, the city, the fact that he stood close enough for me to step into his space, and far enough that he wouldn't take it from me. You really don't touch what isn't freely given, I said quietly. His gaze dropped once to my mouth, then came back to my eyes. No. My pulse jumped. The smart thing would have been to leave. The smart thing would have been to remember I was angry, exhausted, and standing alone on a roof with a man whose name made senators swallow differently. Instead, I stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to change the air. If I kiss you, I said. I don't want gratitude confused with bad judgment. The corner of his mouth moved, brief and dark. Then be very sure which one it is. I was. That was the problem. I kissed him first. I expected resistance, restraint, maybe shock. What I got was control so complete it almost undid me. He didn't grab, didn't claim, didn't use my own choice against me. He lifted one hand, slow enough to stop if I wanted, and touched the side of my neck as if I were something breakable and armed at the same time. His mouth was warm, deliberate, and devastatingly patient. Nothing rushed, nothing stolen. The city disappeared. When he deepened it, it was because I leaned in first. When I slid my hand into his shirt collar, it was because I wanted to feel if a man like Sergio Lombardi had a real pulse or just a better imitation than most. He did. Fast. That thrilled me more than it should have. He broke the kiss first, forehead almost touching mine, breath unsteady for the first time since I had met him. He said, Maya, just my name, but it sounded like a line he was trying not to cross. I swallowed once. What? If this turns into something, it won't be because a room of men thought they witnessed ownership. It took me a second to understand what he meant. Then it hit me all at once. The poker room, my father, the public wager, the city gossip. This man was telling me that whatever happened next, he would never let it be built on that humiliation. Something inside me softened so sharply it almost hurt. Good, I whispered, because if anyone thinks I'm easy to win, they haven't met me. That actually drew a smile from him. Small, rare, beautiful in the most dangerous possible way. No, he said. I don't think easy has ever been part of you. The room beneath me spun a little. I stepped back first, not because I wanted distance, because I needed breath. 3 days later, Enzo Carbone framed me. Security found a case of marked decks in the back of my suite closet. 2 envelopes of skimmed cash were hidden behind a false panel in the dresser I had never noticed, and one of the chip adjustments from a missing transfer had been signed into a ghost login from a terminal attached to my access credentials. It was clean work. Too clean. The meeting that followed happened in one of Sergio's upper conference rooms with 12 men at the table, and enough tension in the air to cut with a butter knife. Valentina stood behind me. Sergio sat at the head. Enzo sat 3 chairs to his right, face arranged into perfect concern. I wanted to shoot him on principle. Instead, I stood there, while one of Sergio's old captains held up the evidence bag with the marked decks and said, "Looks simple enough to me." "Of course it does," I snapped. The captain glared. "Watch your tone. Watch your intelligence. Nobody stupid enough to stash evidence in her own room is smart enough to run the scheme you're all too slow to see." Enzo sighed like I was disappointing him. "This is unfortunate." I turned on him so fast, Valentina shifted half a step. "You know what's unfortunate? Your face." A couple of men looked offended. Sergio's expression didn't change, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. Barely. That kept me from doing anything irrevocable. One captain pushed back from the table. "She shouldn't be in this building." Enzo spread his hands. "No one wants this to be true, but emotion isn't evidence." I laughed out loud. Then I looked at Sergio, and for one horrible second he said nothing. Nothing. After everything on the roof. After the investigation. After the blood at Velvet Room, and the night he told me it would only be real if I chose it. Nothing. It hit harder than I expected. Then he stood. The room obeyed the movement like gravity. "Maya stays under guard," he said. "Restricted access. No phones. No outside contact. Until I know whether I'm looking at betrayal or bait." The floor dropped out from under me. I stared at him. He did not look back. That hurt more than anger would have. Valentina touched my elbow lightly. A warning. Not pressure. Play it right. Or maybe I only imagined that. I let her lead me out because pride with no plan gets women killed. The guest wing they put me in was luxurious enough to be insulting. Locked from the outside. 2 guards in the hallway. No devices. No windows that opened. I stood in the middle of the room and tried very hard not to smash everything made of glass. Betrayal felt hot, then cold, then stupid. By midnight I had worn a path into the carpet. At 1 a.m, the door opened. Sergio stepped inside alone. The guards shut it behind him. I didn't move. He stood just inside the room, sleeves rolled, jaw hard, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. "Say whatever you came to say," I said. "Then get out." He crossed the room without hurry and held out my knife. I stared at it, then at him. "The room was wired," he said quietly. "Half the table is still being watched." Enzo needed to see doubt. So did the men who haven't chosen sides yet. I didn't take the knife. "That was your explanation? Publicly hand me over to suspicion and privately return my blade like I'm supposed to admire the strategy?" His voice stayed level. "No. My explanation is that if I defended you in that room without proof, Enzo would have vanished before dawn and taken whatever he's moving with him. This way he thinks he split us." The anger in me shifted shape, not gone. Complicated. That would have been useful to know before I stood there like an idiot. It couldn't be. I folded my arms tighter. "You don't get to hurt me for the greater good and call it clean because you had a reason." Something finally cracked through his control then. Not temper. Frustration. Real and sharp. "You think I don't know that?" The room went still. His hand tightened around the knife once before he set it on the table between us. "I am trying to keep you alive, unbroken, and in possession of your own name, while a man inside my operation rigs my floors and buys people around me one debt at a time. There are no clean moves left." That shut me up. Because it was true. Because I was tired enough to hate truth on sight. He dragged a hand across the back of his neck and looked at me in a way that felt more dangerous than anger. "Enzo moved fast after the frame," he said. "He took your father from the rehab center I had him in." I stared. "You had him where?" "He would have been dead in 48 hours on the street. Don't mistake mercy for sentiment." "Do you know where he is?" "Not yet." My chest tightened. Not because I wanted my father back. Because loose men with addictions made useful corpses. Sergio pulled a folded note from his pocket and handed it to me. One line. "Bring the ace. Come alone. Midnight tomorrow. Old Star Motel." My fingers clenched around the paper. He knows I took it. He guessed, or someone saw. I looked up. "You want me to stay put while you set traps. I want you not to walk into one." I should have said yes. Instead, I said, "That's my father. And this is Enzo Carbone." We stared at each other across a distance suddenly full of too much. Then he said quieter, "Don't go without me." The way he said it almost undid me. Not as an order, as a plea he hated needing. I looked away first. That should have been my answer. It wasn't. The Old Star Motel sat at the edge of the city where Vegas started pretending it ended. Neon graveyard, broken signs, sand chewing at cracked asphalt. A place old enough to remember when men still came west with revolvers and better lies. I went alone anyway. Of course I did. Because grief makes women do stupid things that look like courage from far away. Because no matter how old you get, there is always some part of you that still goes when your father is at the center of the fire. Because Enzo was right about at least one thing. I wanted answers more than I wanted instructions. I parked 2 blocks away, slipped through the back service lane, and entered through a door hanging half off its frame. The ace sat taped under my ribs inside a compression wrap, knife at my thigh, cheap burner in my pocket on silent. I had left my real phone behind. If Sergio was tracking me, he'd have to use the bug Valentina once threatened to sew into the seam of my jacket and I had laughed at. Turns out she had not been joking. Room 11 still had a working light. My father was tied to a chair in the middle of it. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. Blood dried under one nostril, one eye swollen, wrists raw from rope. When he saw me, something like shame finally made it into his face. Maya. I stopped just inside the doorway. The room smelled like mildew, old smoke, and regret. No, I said. You don't get my name like that. He swallowed hard. I didn't know he'd go that far. Which man? His laugh broke halfway out. That's the problem, isn't it? There are so many to choose from. I stood where I was. Talk. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again with the dazed clarity some men only found when they ran out of lies big enough to stand inside. Enzo came to me 2 months ago. Said he could clear the medical note and part of the house debt if I sat in a few games and played stupid on command. Said all I had to do was bring you if things got bad. Cold flooded me. He wanted me there. You see too much, my father whispered. Always did. He remembered you from back when you were a kid in the side rooms. Said if you saw a pattern, he'd know exactly how to move the rest. Rage climbed through me so fast I had to breathe around it. So you sold my eyes. His head dropped. I thought Lombardi would never take the bet. There it was. The rotten center. Not that he hadn't offered me, that he had miscalculated the room. You thought wrong. He looked up at me, and for one awful second, I saw the man I used to wait for on the stoop, the one who sometimes bought me orange soda when he won small, and called me his lucky star like it meant something. I know, he said. Mija, I know. I stepped closer then, not out of forgiveness, but because I wanted him to hear every word clearly. You know what the worst part is? It isn't the debt. It isn't the forged papers. It isn't even hearing you put me on a table in front of strangers. It's that some part of me still came when they took you. I hate that about myself. His face crumpled. Good. He deserved at least that much. A slow clap sounded from the doorway behind me. Enzo Carbone leaned against the frame in a dark coat, smiling like a man pleased with the arrangement of flowers at his own funeral. 4 men spread behind him. I stepped sideways instantly, putting the chair and my father between us. Enzo's gaze dropped to my torso. You brought it, maybe. He laughed softly. Still the smart one. Still the worm in a good suit. His smile sharpened. You see, this is why I wanted you in my rooms. Most people don't notice the shape of the trick. You always did. I kept my breathing steady. He took one slow step inside. Give me the ace, and I let him go. My father made a broken sound. Don't. Enzo ignored him. It's only a card, Maya. It's never just a card. Something in his eyes acknowledged that, almost approvingly. Then he sighed. Pity. The men behind him moved. So did I. I threw the room light. Darkness swallowed us. A gun went off. My father shouted. I dropped low, kicked the chair sideways into the first body I sensed coming through the room, then drove my shoulder into the second man's knee hard enough to hear it pop. He screamed. I came up with the knife already in hand and slashed across a forearm reaching for me. Someone hit the wall. Someone cursed. Muzzle flash bloomed once, bright and blinding. Then the motel windows exploded inward. Not bullets. Flash charges. White light. Concussive sound. Men yelling in the hall. Valentina. Relief hit so hard it almost weakened me. Then another gunshot cracked from somewhere too close. My father jerked in the chair. For one impossible second, the room froze around the shape of it. He looked down. Blood spread across his shirt. No, I heard myself say, though I didn't remember deciding to speak. Enzo swore and bolted toward the bathroom window as Sergio's men came through the doorway like judgment with better tailoring. Sergio himself hit the room last. He saw me first, then my father, then the blood. Carbone! Valentina shouted from the alley. Gunfire erupted outside. I dropped to my knees beside the chair. My father was breathing in wet, broken pulls. The shot had gone through high in the chest. Bad. Very bad. My hands found the wound automatically. Pressure. Angle. Stay with me. Stay. He caught my wrist. There was blood on his teeth when he tried to smile. Still, faster than the room. My vision blurred. Don't. Maya. His grip was weak, but not weak enough to ignore. Listen. I said don't. He coughed, pain carving the truth out of him in pieces. I loved the table more than anything, he rasped. That's the ugliest truth I know. More than sense. More than your mother. More than the little girl waiting for me on the stoop. I kept thinking one good hand would fix what I'd broken. Tears hit my face before I noticed them. You don't get to tell me this now. I know. That almost broke me more than the blood. But you don't play like me. You never did. You read the room and survive it. Bet on yourself for once, Mija. Not on men like me. His fingers slipped. I grabbed them back. My father looked past me then, toward the doorway where Sergio stood for one fraction of a second before moving again because Enzo was still alive, and men like him never got the luxury of one crisis at a time. Then my father looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and then he was gone. I don't remember screaming. Valentina told me later I didn't. I just stopped making sound for a while. Enzo escaped that night through the alley and vanished into the maze of old service roads behind the motel. Two of his men didn't. One bled out in the parking lot. The other talked before sunrise, enough to confirm what I had already guessed. Enzo wasn't only skimming money. He was building a parallel book, buying compromised dealers, city officials, and captains one debt at a time, so that when he moved against Sergio, half the room would already belong to him, and the other half would be too afraid to say no. My father had been one thread in a bigger net. I spent the next day in my mother's house alone. North Las Vegas, one-story stucco, sun-cracked driveway. The front porch light still tilted slightly to the left because my mother had always said we'd fix it next weekend. There would never be a next weekend. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and cried until my ribs hurt. Not just for my father, not even mostly for him, for my mother, for the years, for the version of me who kept surviving men and calling it strength, because she didn't know what else to do with the bruises they left where no one could see. Sergio did not come in. He stayed outside with one guard in the driveway for nearly 2 hours because he understood something most men never did, that sometimes protection looks like distance. When I finally opened the front door, he was leaning against a black sedan in shirt sleeves, the desert sun carving hard light into the side of his face. Neither of us spoke at first. I walked down the porch steps, stopped in front of him, and asked, "Did you know I'd come out eventually?" Yes. That confidence get exhausting? Sometimes. I should have smiled. Instead I said, "He died telling the truth. I hate that it took a bullet." Sergio looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Truth is expensive in this city." The words should have sounded cynical. They didn't. Just tired. I laughed once through a throat scraped raw from crying. "You really know how to comfort a woman." "I know how not to lie to one." That did it. I stepped forward and pressed my forehead to his chest, and the second I did, his arms came around me, not tight, not possessive, just there, solid, warm, unshaking. I broke apart in his arms in the middle of my mother's cracked driveway, while Vegas traffic hissed somewhere far off, and the sun kept burning like the world hadn't noticed anything important had happened. He didn't tell me to calm down. He didn't tell me my father had been weak or tragic or complicated. He just held me until I could breathe without shaking. When I finally pulled back, he touched one knuckle under my eye, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized was still there. "Come back with me," he said. I looked at him. "To the tower or the war?" Yes. That was such a Sergio answer I actually laughed. And because I laughed, because the grief cracked open just enough to let something living through, I realized I wasn't afraid of going back. Not to Palazzo Nero, not to him. "I'm done running from tables other men built," I said. His gaze sharpened. "Good," he said, "because we end this in 3 days." He told me the plan that night in the private lounge above the main casino floor, while the city below kept gambling as if none of its most dangerous men were quietly repositioning for blood. Enzo had arranged a charity high-stakes invitational at the Crescent Ballroom, one of Sergio's newer properties, with gaming commissioners, hotel investors, politicians, and old Vegas families in attendance. Public enough to legitimize, private enough to cheat. It was supposed to be a showcase of unity after rumors of internal theft. Instead, it would be Enzo's pivot point. He meant to expose selected evidence, create panic, move allied captains against Sergio, and use the confusion to seize the cash routes he had already compromised. He also meant to kill Sergio, if he had to. "He'll rig the table again," I said. "Yes. And you're going to sit anyway." "Yes." I looked at him across the lounge, where the city lights turned the windows into mirrors at night. "No," I said. "I am." He went still. Valentina, near the bar, very carefully did not look pleased. Sergio's voice dropped. "No." I folded my arms. The last time I stood beside a poker table, I was the pot. This time I choose the chair. His jaw tightened. "Maya, you need someone who knows the signals. The deck language, the burn patterns, even the way Enzo cheats when he thinks he's the smartest man in the room. That's me, not one of your captains, not a hired shark. Me. I'm not debating your intelligence. I'm debating the risk. I know. That's why I'm right." Valentina muttered something under her breath in Italian that sounded unflattering but approving. Sergio looked at her. She said nothing. Then he looked back at me. "If I say no, I do it without telling you." His eyes narrowed. "That threat would work better if you hadn't already proven it." I tilted my head. "Exactly." For a second the room held the kind of silence that usually came before arguments or gunfire. Then Sergio exhaled once through his nose, which I was learning meant he had lost a battle with me, and hated that some part of him respected it. You play one seat, he said. Valentina controls the room. 2 shooters in the rafters answer to me, not the event security. Hidden audio on your left wrist. If anything feels wrong, you say the word and the table stops. What word? He thought for half a beat. Home. I stared at him. He didn't seem to realize what that did to me until my expression changed. Then his face softened. Only slightly, but enough. You hate it, he said. No, I answered honestly. That's the problem. He came around the table slowly, stopping close enough that my pulse tripped, but not close enough to make it hard to think. Then don't make me regret agreeing. I tipped my chin up. You say that like you don't know I'm the best bad decision you've made in years. A dark, rare smile touched his mouth. That, he said. I know. We trained for 2 days. Not poker. I didn't need help there. Everything else. Valentina ran me through live room security patterns, exit timing, floor blind spots, emergency lock sequences, and wrist mic triggers. Rafe, walking with a slight limp and entirely too much stubbornness for a man recently shot in the leg, taught me how to move through a crowd without looking like I was hunting someone. Sergio said very little during those sessions, but he watched all of them. Always watched. On the second night, long after the ballroom had been swept and the cameras remapped, I found him alone in the empty high-limit room where this whole nightmare had started. The poker table sat under soft green light, clean deck at center, chairs pushed in with mathematical precision. He was standing at the same place he had stood the night my father tried to wager my life. I walked in and closed the door behind me. You planning to burn the table for symbolism? I asked. Or is that tomorrow? He looked over his shoulder. I was considering new felt. I almost smiled. Then my eyes dropped to the spot where my father's chair had been. Something passed through me so quick it hurt. Sergio saw it. Without a word, he pulled out the chair closest to him and sat. Not at the head, beside it. An invitation, not a command. I took the seat opposite. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he slid something across the table. The folded contract from that first night. My name. My father's forged notes. His signature. Sergio's. I looked up. When this ends, he said, this burns. Why show me now? Because if tomorrow goes wrong, I don't want you thinking there's a piece of paper in my safe I value more than your choice. The room got very quiet. I touched the edge of the contract but didn't pick it up. Why do you do that? Do what? Say things that make it hard to remember you scare half the city. He leaned back slightly, eyes on me. I prefer the half that listens. I laughed once, then sobered. If I don't walk out tomorrow, you will. Sergio. His face changed instantly, not because I interrupted, because of the way I said his name. I kept my voice steady anyway. If I don't, I need you to hear this while I still own the breath to say it. What happened between us didn't happen because you won a hand. It happened because you never once acted like I was something to collect. He didn't move. Not even a blink, so I kept going, because honesty was expensive, and I was suddenly rich enough to afford it. I don't know what this becomes after Enzo. Maybe it becomes impossible. Maybe it becomes the only quiet thing in either of our lives. But it's real to me. That's all I know. For one long second, Sergio Lombardi looked completely stripped of the armor the city built around him. Then he stood, came around the table, and stopped beside my chair. He offered me his hand. Just that. I took it and stood. He lifted my hand, turned it, pressed his mouth once to the inside of my wrist, where my pulse beat hardest. When he looked up, there was nothing cold in his eyes. If tomorrow goes wrong, he said quietly, I burn the city before I let them keep you. My breath caught. That's wildly unhealthy. Yes, I smiled then, helpless and real. So are you. The Crescent Ballroom glowed like a trap made of gold. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, velvet ropes, dealers in black. Politicians pretending not to recognize bookmakers. Investors laughing too hard at mediocre jokes because power makes cowards sociable. Everything polished, expensive, and just a little bit false. Perfect for Vegas. I wore black, not a dress designed to make men stare. A tailored black suit cut close enough to move in, with my hair pulled cleanly back and my mother's ring on my right hand. Valentina had wanted an earpiece. I refused. The wrist mic was enough. My ace was tucked inside the hidden inner seam of my jacket. Sergio entered the ballroom 10 minutes after me and still changed the air. He wore a black tuxedo like it was another weapon. Men turned. Women pretended not to. Cameras flashed. He acknowledged none of it. His eyes found me once across the room. Only once. It was enough. Enzo Carbone played the gracious host beautifully. That was the thing about men like him. Evil always dressed better when it wanted applause. He moved from table to table shaking hands, smiling at commissioners, flattering donors, sliding poison into conversation without ever touching the glass. The final table began at 9:30. I took the empty seat to Sergio's right, just as the crowd settled into attentive silence. The announcer said my name like it was a curiosity. Whispers moved through the room. Some recognized me from rumors. The girl from the poker game, the one Lombardi had supposedly won. Let them whisper. By the time I was done, I wanted them choking on it. Enzo sat across from me. Bold choice, he said softly while the dealer shuffled. Cheats always say that when they're nervous. He smiled. Still grieving and still mouthy. Impressive. I stacked my chips. Still alive and still better at reading you than you are at hiding it. The first few hands were exactly what I expected. Enzo played patient. The dealer too clean, too smooth, overcorrecting for honesty because he knew people would watch his hands. That was its own tell. Honest dealers didn't perform innocence. They just dealt. I let 2 small pots go. 1-1. Folded one with a hand I could have pushed just to see who reacted. A gaming commissioner watched from 2 tables over. 2 of Sergio's captains stood near the back wall, pretending to discuss fundraising. Valentina moved through the room like a shadow in heels and steel. By hand 7, I saw it. Not in the dealer's fingers. In the discard tray. The cornerware on the burn cards didn't match the live deck. Different humidity storage. Different lacquer age. They had cold cards ready to slide when the moment mattered. I kept my face blank. Sergio hadn't played a hand yet. He was waiting. So was I. Enzo won 2 medium pots and relaxed by a fraction. That was his mistake. Men always got stupid the second they mistook patience for advantage. On hand 10, I got pocket queens. Enzo's eyes changed when he saw my bet size. The dealer's left thumb pressed a hair too long against the top edge of the deck. There it was. The move. The turn came clean. The river was coming dirty. I knew it 1 second before it happened. Hold! My voice cut through the ballroom so sharply that half the room startled. The dealer froze with the river card still pinched between 2 fingers. Every head turned. Sergio did not move. Enzo smiled thinly. Something wrong. Something. Yes, I said. I stood slowly and looked not at him, but at the commissioner watching from the side. Then at the room. Then at the dealer. That card didn't come from the same deck as the burn. Silence cracked across the ballroom. The dealer swallowed. That's absurd, is it? I reached toward the discard tray. Valentina was at my shoulder instantly, not stopping me, just close enough to shoot someone if they got creative. I picked up the last burn card and held it under the chandelier light. To most people, the edge tint looks black, I said, voice steady enough to make the room lean in. It isn't. It's blue-black. Slight varnish difference. Same as the ace from the game 4 weeks ago where my father was set up at a marked table. The whispers got louder. Enzo's smile vanished. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the bagged ace. Gasps rippled across the room. Sergio's gaze hit mine, hard and bright. There was no surprise there, only pride so fierce it almost broke me. I set the ace beside the burn card. Same notch pattern, I said. Same edge treatment. Same cold stock. Enzo Carbone has been using rigged decks across multiple properties to buy debts and leverage people under the cover of ghost losses. A commissioner stood. One of the investors did too. Enzo shoved back from his chair. This is a stunt. No, I said. This is math finally getting tired of your face. The dealer bolted. Valentina dropped him before he made 3 steps. Then the lights went out. Of course they did. The ballroom plunged into black and screaming in the same breath. I hit the floor by instinct. Gunshot. Another. Then Sergio's voice, low and furious through chaos. Seal the room. Emergency lights flashed on blood red. People were running. Security was shouting. A waiter crashed into a roulette display. Someone sobbed. Someone else prayed. Enzo was gone. I didn't wait for permission. I ran. Service corridor. Left turn. Maintenance stairs. I knew the route because I had memorized it 2 days earlier with Valentina breathing down my neck and correcting my timing. My wrist might crackled. Maya, Sergio's voice. Where? North service stairs, I panted. Stop. No. A beat full of static and anger. Then, roof access. He'll try the sign catwalk. Same thought I had already had. I hit the stairwell hard, took steps 2 at a time, and shoved through the door onto the maintenance roof just as Vegas wine slammed into me with hot metal and old neon. The city spread out below in electric madness. Ahead of me, Enzo dragged a wounded arm and a pistol toward the old vertical palazzo sign that climbed up the side of the building. Narrow catwalk. No good cover. Bad footing. Sergio burst through the door behind me a second later. Then a shot cracked. Sergio staggered. My heart stopped. He went down on one knee near the stairwell wall, one hand clamping his shoulder. Enzo laughed once, breathless and vicious. There you are. Time narrowed. The wound wasn't center mass. Shoulder. Bloody but survivable. If we survived. Enzo backed onto the catwalk with his gun trained on Sergio and his eyes on me. Funny city, he called over the wind. Men build everything in it on luck, then act offended when the house cheats. House? I stepped sideways, drawing his attention. You were never the house. You were just the rat in the wiring." His mouth twisted, still trying to impress him. I looked at Sergio once. He was up again, barely, blood on his shirt, eyes cold enough to freeze the roof solid, then back to Enzo. "No," I said. "I'm finishing what you started." He shifted the gun toward me. That was what I wanted, because the second he did, he lost Sergio for half a heartbeat, because the catwalk beneath him dipped slightly under his left foot, where the support grating had rusted at the seam, because men like Enzo always watched faces first when they were winning. My father taught me that too. I moved, not toward the gun, toward the control box mounted beside the sign support. I slammed the emergency cutoff with the maintenance bar lying at my feet. The Palazzo sign died in an instant. The world dropped into dark. Enzo fired blind. The shot sparked off metal. I hit him low and hard, shoulder driving into his hips the way my boxing coach had drilled into me 1,000 times with language a lady should not use, and I absolutely did. The gun went skidding across the catwalk. Enzo grabbed a fistful of my jacket, and we crashed sideways into the rail. For one awful second, there was only wind and steel, and the drop yawning under us full of city lights. He drove an elbow into my ribs. Pain burst white behind my eyes. I brought the maintenance bar up under his jaw with every ounce of rage I had carried since the night my father said my name like I was collateral. His grip loosened. I tore free. He lunged for the fallen gun. Sergio fired first. The shot cracked through dark and wind. Enzo froze, then looked down at the blooming stain in his chest, like he couldn't believe the math had finally turned on him. He swayed once, twice, and disappeared over the lower side rail into the darkness below. Silence hit the roof so hard it rang. Then my knees gave out. I dropped to the catwalk and sat there shaking, staring at the place where Enzo had been. Sergio was beside me a second later, despite the blood running down his arm. His hand cupped the back of my neck, steady and warm and real. "Look at me." I did. The city blurred. "You with me." "Yes, good." Then the adrenaline left in one vicious wave, and I leaned into him before I even realized I had moved. He got me off the catwalk, down the maintenance roof, and into the service corridor where Valentina found us with a med team and exactly one raised brow that somehow managed to say, "I told you so." Thank God. And if either of you die now, I will be extremely annoyed. Sergio refused treatment until mine was done. I refused treatment until his was started. Valentina threatened to tranquilize both of us. Rafe, pale but alive and limping faster than his doctor had approved, called us insufferable. The hospital was private, discreet, and expensive enough that even the walls probably signed non-disclosure agreements. Sergio's shoulder was stitched. My ribs were bruised, one nearly cracked, and my hands looked like I had punched a truck. We were both alive. That felt unreasonable. By morning, the story had spread through every part of Las Vegas that mattered. Enzo dead, rigged decks exposed, commissioner investigation open, 3 councilmen suddenly unavailable for comment, 2 captains pledging renewed loyalty to Lombardi before sunrise, half the city pretending it had always known how this would end, the other half pretending it hadn't been taking Carbone's calls. Vegas never apologized. It only adjusted. A week later, the last of the papers tied to my father's fraud were voided, the house title transferred cleanly into my name, the medical note disappeared, bank holds lifted. 2 lenders were quietly persuaded never to call again. Veronica delivered the final packet to me with professional satisfaction and a bottle of very good champagne. I did not drink because I had learned too early what happened to families who built celebrations around alcohol. I was standing in the empty private poker room when Sergio found me there on the 8th night after the ballroom. Same green lamps, same polished table, different air. No ghosts now, only memory. He closed the door behind him and crossed the room slowly. His shoulder was healing. The stitches were gone. The suit was dark charcoal tonight, no tie, top button open, more man than myth, more dangerous for it. In his hand was a silver lighter. He set it on the table. Then he laid down the folded contract from that first night, the deed copy, the last debt note, and the ace. I looked at all of it without speaking. He struck the lighter once. Flame bloomed. Then he pushed it toward me. I understood. I picked up the contract first, held the corner to the fire, and watched it catch. The paper curled black. Signature lines vanished. Debt language blistered into nothing. I burned the deed copy next only because the original was safe, and this felt earned. Then the note. Last, I looked at the ace for a long time before feeding it to the flame too. When the final ember died in the ashtray, the room seemed to exhale. Sergio watched me the whole time. Finally he said, "I won the hand, Maya." I looked up. His eyes never left mine, but I never won you. The words landed somewhere deep and quiet. For a second I couldn't speak. Then I stood, came around the table, and stopped in front of him. "No," I said softly. "You didn't." His jaw tightened once. That old fear flashed under the control, the one he hid so well from everyone else. The fear that power let him keep cities, money, loyalty, territory, but never anything freely given. I touched the front of his shirt, right over the heartbeat I had checked with my own mouth on a rooftop 2 lifetimes ago. You earned me, I said. That's different. He went completely still. Then his hand came up to my face, thumb brushing once along my cheek, like he was confirming I was real, and not another thing this city had loaned him temporarily. Maya. It was just my name, but it sounded like the answer to a question he had been living with too long. I smiled a little through the ache in my ribs. You know, the city is still telling the story wrong. Cities usually do. They say Sergio Lombardi won me in a poker game. His mouth curved faintly. Did he? I stepped closer until there was no room left between us at all. No, I said. He won back every piece of me my father tried to lose. And then he was smart enough to wait until I chose the rest. That broke the last of his restraint. He kissed me like a man who had spent his whole life controlling damage and had finally found one thing worth risking imbalance for. No hurry, no doubt, no audience, just truth, warm and devastating and ours. My hand slid up his chest and around his neck. His arm came around my waist carefully, mindful of bruises even now. The table, the room, the city, the rumors, the blood, the cards, none of it vanished. It just stopped owning the center. When we finally pulled apart, my breath unsteady, his forehead rested against mine. What now? He asked. I smiled. Now I keep the house. Good. I keep my name. Also good. I take over integrity operations for your casinos on a contract that lets me fire anyone who mistakes me for decoration. That drew a real laugh from him, low and rare. Done. And when we fight, because obviously we're going to fight, you don't pull rank and I don't throw ashtrays unless absolutely necessary. He considered that with maddening seriousness. Define absolutely necessary. I laughed against his mouth. Then I looked up at him and said the truest thing I had left. The last time I stood in this room, I thought my life was over. His gaze darkened, not with anger, but with memory. It should never have happened. No, I said, but it did. And I'm done letting the ugliest night of my life tell the whole story. I took his hand and led him away from the table, away from the room, toward the elevator and the city waiting below with all its lights and lies and ruined odds. Las Vegas still whispered what it wanted. It still said my father bet me in a poker game and Sergio Lombardi, the Mafia boss who controlled half the city, won me. Let them whisper. Only Sergio and I knew the truth. The night my father tried to lose me, I didn't become anybody's prize. I became impossible to wager ever again.